They call it cosa nostra, meaning our thing. To outsiders, it is a name drenched in blood and whispered in fear. To its members, it was once a sacred vow, a brotherhood stronger than family, bound together by loyalty, silence, and power. For over a century, the Italian Mafia has controlled lives, shaped governments, and influenced history. It is a story of violence and secrecy, of men who saw themselves as rulers of the underworld, and of a society that often looked the other way. Behind the myths, the Mafia is not just an organization, but a dark mirror of human ambition and weakness. The origins of the Mafia lie in the rugged hills of 19th century Sicily, where poverty, corruption, and foreign domination left ordinary people with little trust in government. Law and justice were fragile concepts. In this vacuum, groups of armed men began to offer protection and justice outside the law. They claimed to defend farmers, merchants, and villages from bandits or oppressive landlords. But protection came at a price. Those who refused to pay became targets themselves. Over time, these groups evolved into an organized network of clans, families bound not by blood, but by allegiance to a code. This was the birth of the Sicilian Mafia. The foundation of their power rested on one word: omerta. This was the code of silence. No member, no victim, no associate would speak to authorities, no matter the crime. To betray omerta was to invite death not only for yourself, but for your family. Fear silenced entire communities, and silence gave the Mafia its greatest shield. It allowed murders to go unpunished, extortion to flourish, and leaders to rule from the shadows. For many Sicilians, paying tribute to the Mafia became as natural as paying taxes. Resistance meant punishment. Cooperation with the state meant execution. As the Mafia grew in power, it developed its own rituals and structure. To become a man of honor, an uomo d'onore, initiation required a ceremony steeped in blood and secrecy. The recruit's finger was pricked, his blood dripping onto a sacred image of a saint. The picture was burned in his hands as he swore allegiance to the family, promising to remain loyal until death. From that moment on, he belonged to Cosa Nostra, bound by oath to put the organization above everything else, even his real family. The Mafia had its own laws, its own system of justice, and its own way of governing life and death. By the early 20th century, Mafia influence was no longer confined to Sicily. Waves of Italian immigrants arrived in the United States, carrying with them not only traditions of home, but also the seeds of organized crime. In cities like New York, Chicago, and New Orleans, Sicilian gangs quickly established themselves. But it was prohibition in the 1920s that turned small-time racketeers into criminal empires. With alcohol banned, bootlegging became the lifeblood of the Mafia. Speakeasies flourished, illegal shipments poured in, and rival gangs fought bloody wars for control of the trade. Violence filled the streets, but behind the bloodshed was a new kind of wealth and power. In America, the Mafia became known as la Cosa Nostra. Its structure was disciplined, almost military. At the top stood the boss, the unquestioned leader. Below him, the underboss acted as second in command, while capo regimes, or capos, commanded crews of soldiers who carried out the dirty work. Associates, often not fully initiated, formed the outer ring of the organization, running errands, making money, and dreaming of one day becoming made men. Loyalty to the family was absolute. Betrayal was answered with death, often in brutal fashion, and the blood oath ensured that once you entered, there was no escape. Figures like Lucky Luciano, Carlo Gambino, and Vito Genovese became infamous in America, turning crime into big business. Luciano, in particular, was a visionary. He transformed the Mafia from disorganized street gangs into a national syndicate. He created the Commission, a governing body of Mafia families that settled disputes and divided territories. Under Luciano, the Mafia stopped acting like neighborhood thugs and began operating like multinational corporations. They infiltrated labor unions, controlled dockyards, and extended their reach into gambling, narcotics, and construction. Violence remained their tool, but business became their language. In Sicily, the Mafia thrived too, manipulating elections, controlling agriculture, and building ties with politicians. After World War II, when Allied forces invaded Italy, Mafia leaders were even used by American intelligence as local contacts against fascists. This unexpected alliance allowed old mafia families to regain power and legitimacy in post-war Sicily. By the 1950s and 60s, their grip extended not just into fields and villages, but into the booming heroin trade, making them key players in international narcotics. But the mafia's thirst for power brought bloody consequences. In the 1970s and 80s, a new generation of bosses like Toto Riina and Bernardo Provenzano led the Sicilian Mafia into an era of unprecedented violence. Riina, known as the Beast, ruled with fear, ordering bombings and assassinations against anyone who stood in his way, including journalists, politicians, and even judges. The murders of anti-mafia magistrates Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino in 1992 shocked Italy to its core. These two men had dared to challenge Cosa Nostra in court, uncovering its leaders and operations. Their brutal assassinations sparked national outrage and led to massive crackdowns on mafia power. In America, too, the golden age of the mafia began to crack. Law enforcement finally found its weapon, the RICO Act, a law that allowed prosecutors to target entire criminal organizations rather than just individuals. Wiretaps, undercover agents, and flipped informants brought down once untouchable bosses. In the 1980s, the famous Commission trial saw top mafia leaders in New York convicted, ending decades of dominance. For the first time, the mafia's iron grip on entire cities began to loosen. Yet despite these defeats, the mafia never truly disappeared. In Sicily, the organization shifted tactics, moving away from open violence to more subtle infiltration of business and politics. In America, while no longer the towering power it once was, mafia families still exist, operating quietly in gambling, extortion, and construction rackets. The flashy gangsters of the past may be gone, but their successors learned to hide in plain sight, blending crime with legitimate business. The legacy of the mafia is complicated. It is a story soaked in blood and betrayal, but also wrapped in myth and fascination. Hollywood turned gangsters into icons. Films like The Godfather romanticized their world, and television series like The Sopranos explored their contradictions. These portrayals blurred the lines between reality and fiction, making ruthless killers appear as tragic anti-heroes. But behind the glamour lies a harsher truth. The mafia destroyed lives, strangled economies, and kept entire communities in fear for generations. Cosa Nostra is more than a crime story. It is a lesson about society itself. It thrived where governments failed, where corruption flourished, and where fear silenced ordinary people. It shows us how organized crime feeds on poverty, injustice, and weak institutions. And it reminds us that myths can be more dangerous than bullets, for they make us forget the suffering hidden behind the legends. The mafia may no longer hold the power it once did, but its shadow still lingers. Its secrets are still uncovered in courtrooms, its influence still surfaces in politics and business, and its myths still dominate our culture. The name Cosa Nostra continues to send chills, not because of what it is today, but because of the memory of what it once was. A secret brotherhood that defied governments, ruled with fear, and made blood its currency. So the question remains, when we think of the mafia, do we see ruthless criminals who poison society? Or do we see the dangerous legends we've built around them? And perhaps more importantly, how many secrets of Cosa Nostra still remain hidden, waiting to be revealed?